In the 1960s and early 70s, amidst mounting opposition to the Vietnam War and political upheaval over civil rights, the University of California at Berkeley's campus emerged as an epicenter of movements for social change. Although many saw this period of political activism and social ferment as a threat to the academy, some visionaries saw an opportunity for scholarly inquiry and intellectual transformation.
In this period, not a single campus, not a single institute in the entire UC system was devoted to the study of race. Not a single one. In spite of the fact that now we had, the Watts riots in '65, you had the Panthers movement here in the '67 period, you had the Black Power movement. Mobilization around black issues was intense, but not a single institute on the whole UC system was studying race.
In April of '68, Martin Luther King was assassinated. April 4th, I believe, 1968. And as a result of his being assassinated, there was another urgent attempt to recruit minorities to the University of California at Berkeley as well as other campuses.
In that first period between '66, '67, and then '76, which is where we began our story of the Institute, there was this movement to have an institute. It came to fruition quickly, but they had a crisis. Who would direct it?
Part of the challenge to the university on the part of people who pressed for an institute that dealt with issues of race and gender was that here was this big campus. We've been in the midst of racial ferment, particularly in '68, when you had a whole series of actions and riots, and there was no research institute on the campus that dealt with issues of race and society.
In the spring of 1975, Sandy Elberg, the dean of the graduate division, asked Troy Duster, then a faculty member in the Department of Sociology, to direct the Institute of Race and Community Relations.
And I was on a committee to review the fate of the old Institute for Race and Community Relations. And I was meeting at the same time with a group of people, including Dave Matza, but another 12, 15 people in the Bay Area, not all UC Berkeley faculty. And we kept saying there should be an institute devoted to what's happening in the society, visceral, nascent social change that was going on, not only about race, but about other issues and around social change.
They didn't want to get rid of the Community and Race Institute because it was the only thing on campus that even addressing, that I knew of, now it might have been somewhere, addressing the issue of race and et cetera. And so they asked Troy Duster to take it over. Race and community relations was like a dormant research center, hadn't done very much, wasn't known very much, wasn't very strong. So as a consequence of that, and we couldn't name it the Herbert Blumer Research Center, I think we came up with the Institute for the Study of Social Change.
In the fall of 1976, Troy Duster and his colleagues founded the Institute for the Study of Social Change, replacing the Institute of Race and Community Relations.
I had a sabbatical and I was going to come down here and do this sabbatical, and Troy called me up and asked me if I wanted to be a postdoc fellow. He had gotten some money. And I jumped at the chance, and Hardy Fry and I were both asked to be postdocs.
Dave Webber was there as a postdoc, and he had been working on the project with Robert Blauner, and David Matson so there were like four of us.
The focus on social change reflected the Institute's new mission, both to study the structures of subordination and also to produce research that would help to transform the conditions of inequality.
Bob Blauner and I had worked together on the NIMH Research Training Grant. So we agreed to bring that money into the Institute. So suddenly there was some viability. And that's the background to how the Institute got started in 1976, 77.
Troy was here for a long time, and then we had Pedro Noguera, who was a director for, I think, a year or two. Maybe just only a year because he went off to Harvard. And then it was Michael Omi, who was supposed to be here for only 1 year, but he stayed for 2. And those are all people that I knew as graduate students as well, who became my bosses, you know.
You know, I've always sought out Troy or Bob or David Matza, and, you know, and their perspective and their sense of justice, and, you know, they'd help me get through. So you could say that the group of people that came together at the Institute provided a really strong support system for themselves, for each other.
I think the students come here or have come here because they feel as though it's a place where they can interact with one another in a free environment, so to speak, you know, where they can exchange their ideas and, you know, complain about whatever as well, you know, intellectual as well as personal kinds of things where, you know, in the early days when racism was so rampant and everything, they have somebody to, you know, bounce ideas and thoughts and feelings from.
What the Institute does happens at several levels. One of the things that the Institute is an intellectual home. It's an intellectual home for diversity-related research. It's a place where you can go and no one is going to question the legitimacy of doing this kind of research. They will only work with you constructively to figure out how to do it in the best way possible. So I think one of the things we are is a place where people can go, even if they don't have a lot of like-minded colleagues in their own departments, to do this sort of work. And they will do it in an interdisciplinary, intergenerational, and inclusive setting.
If there's a network of support, it has its own social reality, so that students who had been in their own departments, maybe isolated, could come to the Institute and find this kind of community. I think that became the basis for a lot of what was going to happen in the next period.
So the training program was designed as an extension of a forward program that had started in sociology, as a push, as a remedy for recruitment and retention of graduate students who hadn't been part of the academy, although they were very active in terms of the social engagement in the world in the 60s.
The Graduate Fellows Program is the centerpiece of ISSC's mission. In its early days, the Institute's affiliated faculty trained young scholars in how to conduct ethnographic research.
We had the idea that you could actually spend time at the site of the production of knowledge, production of rates of construction. You'd spend time in clinics and hospitals showing intake patterns. You'd spend time in the schools showing who got tracked and why. So the whole orientation of the Institute was to start with the notion that we would question the very databases that had been the social science foundation.
I think the big difference in the training program is that most graduate division-led programs, they were about recruitment and money. So they recruited you, they gave you money, and then they say goodbye. But the whole notion of the training program, I think the way Troy conceived it was that you learn by doing. So that it was a mentorship program and it had a context, and the Institute was the research context.
Students benefit from mentoring offered in a small seminar format. They receive support from experienced instructors, and they benefit from feedback given by their peers.
So I think it was kind of like trying to strike a balance between, you know, your own respective works as fellows, but also to make a commitment on the part of the fellows for them to make a commitment to push forward collaborative research through the different projects of the Institute.
So I think the fact that we are interdisciplinary, that we're innovative, we're not the captive of any department, gives us a kind of independence that's very hard to find. So everything that happens is not just an individual achievement, but it becomes a part of our collective resources to help to nurture a future generation of scholars. So I'm really proud of our Graduate Fellows Program. I feel in many ways it is the heart and soul, because if you do not have a new generation of people concerned about these issues, they will die. They will disappear. And you see that happen.
Arlie did, and the project that she brought in was very important. And then the project that Troy and Diane Beeson brought in was very important. You know, both of those were path-breaking. You know, people were not doing sociological research in the area of the political and ethical consequences of genetic screening. That was a new thing. You know, women were not doing field work on, you know, families, working class families, and how they survived.
Over the years, ISSC has encouraged avant-garde thinking, community-based projects, and efforts to preserve the history of social activism and social movements. ISSC's researchers often investigated pressing social problems before they were widely recognized. Dr. Diane Beeson and other ISSC researchers, for example, studied the ethical implications of genetics testing in the early 1980s, at least a decade before these concerns became part of the ethical debate in the medical and scientific communities.
It was in the late 70s that Troy convened a small group of colleagues. I think it took us a year or two of conversations thinking about these issues collectively before we came up with the grant proposal, and that was the beginning of our project on the social and political implications of genetic screening.
The Center for Working Families, founded in 1998, is another example of ISSC's commitment to innovative and community-based research. Sociology professors Arlie Hochschild and Barry Thorne, along with other faculty, graduate students, visiting scholars, and postdocs, opened up new frontiers in understanding the legacy of second-wave feminism.
Many of our projects focused on work-family relations. They all somehow had to connect with that. Some were centrally focused on issues relating to care deficits, the organization of care work, the dynamics of what Arlie called cultures of care. And a number of the projects focused specifically on children and childhoods. And from the very beginning, Arlie and I felt it was really important to have attention to social class, divisions and relations, and racial and ethnic variation, and issues of immigration, the kind of cleavages and inequalities that are especially dramatic in urban California.
At Prevention by Design, Dr. Friedner Whitman and his colleagues partner with community organizations to develop systematic approaches in order to prevent alcohol and substance abuse problems.
One of the things we developed are maps, police maps, where you can take a look at the extent of alcohol and drug issues and police calls for service and written reports. And in areas where you have a lot of calls, you get, clumps of problems and so on. So it's a way of looking. Troy looked at one of those maps. He said, "That's just like a die. It shows you what's going on in the community."
In 1989, the Institute welcomed the Chicano Latino Policy Project, which became the Center for Latino Policy Research in 1999.
There was a group of individuals on campus, faculty and some graduate students. I call them visionaries because what they were looking for was that they really felt that there was a need for a space on campus that specifically addressed the needs of the Latino community. The center is an organized research unit, and our main focus is to develop and to support research on public policy issues as they affect Latinos. And basically to that end, we have a couple of programs. The mini grant program for undergraduate and graduate students. So we provide, modest research funds to students who are doing research. We also have a seminar series and offer other colloquia where we invite individuals who are on the cutting edge of public policy issues. The Institute basically provided the infrastructure for us to be able to continue to build on it. And that's one of the things, is that even though the center has continued to grow and will continue to grow, is that it has provided a collaboration opportunities that I think probably we would have missed if we had not been a part of the Institute.
The Emma Goldman Papers project, which began in 1980, demonstrates how ISSC has supported research to preserve the history of social movements.
I went from archive to archive to archive, collecting and organizing Emma Goldman's letters. Emma Goldman, who was a great anarchist at the turn of the century, who was somebody who was looked to as a woman who represented freedom in all realms of life.
Now, more than 25 years later, Falk continues to collect, organize, and edit tens of thousands of documents. These projects, and others that range from studying the impact of BART on low-income neighborhoods to documenting the everyday labor and lives of longshoremen in Richmond and Oakland, convey how the Institute has created avenues for Berkeley scholars to respond to pressing social issues and bridge the gap between academic inquiry and community needs.
There's a lot of support for pushing people in directions that took some courage, that would push the envelope. And it was never, you better not do that because you're not going to get, it's going to be hard to publish that book, it's going to be hard to get tenure, you'll never get tenure. There was never any talk like that. It was, you know, like with me, try it. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, we'll figure something else out.
Over the past 30 years, ISSC staff, faculty, and fellows have conducted over 50 research projects, which have provided the groundwork for a number of future publications. By adopting methods that moved beyond prevailing research paradigms, ISSC researchers produce cutting-edge scholarship. Perhaps no project better exemplified ISSC's mission than the Diversity Project. From 1970 to 1990, the ethnic, cultural, and racial composition of UC Berkeley's undergraduate student body underwent a dramatic transformation. By the 1990s, there was a growing demand for changes in research and teaching that would reflect the needs and interests of these students. Although the university did make some tangible changes with the establishment of ethnic studies, African American studies, and women's studies, questions still remained about the broader impact of diversity on student life.
Here we had a campus which was being transformed in front of our very eyes. You know, the first time we'd ever seen a situation where white students on a major college campus were feeling like they were the minority. This was went out into the early 90s.
And most of the ones I interviewed were not only white, they were fraternity kids. So they were sort of the kids who we assumed would not be terribly sympathetic to affirmative action, and indeed they weren't. They were split, but a large number of them were not. And, you know, they would talk about, you know, why they thought affirmative action was unfair and what bad experiences they had and this and that and this and that.
Informative because people had to juxtapose their own experience in the classroom or sometimes outside the classroom with what we were hearing from the students.
So we did the interviews, and then we had meeting after meeting after meeting about what we were seeing in the transcripts, and the transcripts were printed up, and now I know transcripts don't magically appear in print form now that I'm doing my own ones. But there, I guess they had some resources, so there were these transcripts, and we would take them home, mark them up, I'd think about what was going on, and then come to the meeting and we'd talk about them.
What began as an inquiry into the effects of diversity among college students grew into a research model that would be replicated by other universities.
The more successful projects that we engaged in, and it did have an impact. You may know that it got a lot of media attention, and it was actually on the front page of the New York Times at a certain point, and that generated more interest, and more people around the country began to ask for report copies, and I think we had 2 or 3 printings of about 5,000 each, and it became quite a remarkable story. And what the Diversity Project did was to get some rich data from the students in the experience who said things like, well, we don't really interact with each other in terms of racial groupings. You know, whites don't deal with blacks and Asians don't deal with Latinos and so on. But they said in the classroom, we've had these experiences which were sometimes a function of the faculty member's decision to have a collective project in architecture. Say, well, you 8 people go out and consider this problem or in public health or in sociology. Or, in other words, the collective activity around the curriculum was seen in these student interviews to be vital to their education.
And so I think the Institute now plays a different role. It's not on the cutting edge of the diversification of the academy, but instead what it is doing is creating an intellectual home for those people who are still at Berkeley, who still care about diversity, at a time when they may be more isolated because of the impact of the end of affirmative action. And I think part of being a pioneering organization has been that we've spent a lot of time on getting the questions right. And then when you get the questions right, you can figure out how to answer them. But we have spent a lot of time making sure people don't have blind spots about what to ask.
It's really about what are the pressing needs in the communities here in Berkeley and across the nation, in urban environments in particular, and how can we begin to address those with research that's informed by community partners.
And so the Institute was founded at a time when there was a real sense of possibility for inclusion, multiculturalism, and pluralism within the academy, and more particularly within the University of California. Now, since that time, we have had Proposition 209, which put an end to all preferences with respect to race and gender. And that has transformed to some extent the landscape of the institution.
30 years ago, I mean, we were dealing with segregation. I mean, just out and out segregation and racism. I mean, we're just, confronting that. That's a pretty, that's a pretty visible target. I mean, that's a very tangible target. Now, as you pointed out, when color blindness seems to be the paradigm that everybody's striving for, or some think that we've already arrived at this point, well, it's a little bit more difficult. I came here 3.5 years ago. I've been directing the center basically since then. And it was sort of like open-ended. I mean, my God, pick your problem, Pick the area that you want to work in. And it's one of the things that we do here is try to make sure the Latino community is visible, right? Certainly on campus. I mean, at lo menos, at the very minimum, we have to do that on this campus and make sure that this campus understands, and I'm talking about faculty and students, understands that there is an intellectual vibrancy to the Latino community.
ISSC has worked to ensure that these pressing social issues are visible outside of the university as well.
Right now I'm working with Irene Bloomrod, who's a professor in sociology, on a pilot project that studies political socialization. In California, for example, the population is growing. As you know, whites are a minority. In 2040, if the rate of participation stays the same for Mexican Americans, they will be a majority in the populace, but still a minority in the electorate. That can't happen. We can't allow that to happen. So we need to find out what is it that's causing this and how can we change it.
In response to growing numbers of immigrant youth, ISSC researchers are seeking to understand their challenges and help institutions respond effectively to youth violence.
The Center on Culture, Immigration, and Youth Violence Prevention is a project of ISSC that seeks to understand youth violence, particularly in Oakland, among Asian and Latino youth, and also to prevent youth violence. And it's a partnership with community organizations and with UCSF. We're doing research to evaluate an intervention with middle school kids. and we're also doing research to involve youth themselves in doing research and designing programs to prevent youth violence.
The Digital Kids Project is exploring how new technologies, ranging from computer games to chat rooms to text messaging, are transforming the ways in which children think and learn.
Kids are being innovative. They're doing things that nobody planned. They're inventing new genres. Well, our topic is informal learning, which is how kids learn using technology outside of school. But our first principle that Mimi and I agree on is taking kids' point of view. And if you read the literature, an awful lot of it talks about kids growing up or being taught things. Well, we're interested in how kids learn things and how kids can take initiative in learning.
These dynamic examples show how the Institute remains a vibrant home for new generations of scholars. Graduate students focus on their own research while also benefiting from the richness of the projects around them.
No, I know that with the training that I've gotten here, with the relationships that I've made with people here, that there is a niche, there is a space for my work. You know, I'm currently a visiting scholar at UC Santa Barbara, and I've shared with them some of the curriculum, the syllabus that we use here for the graduate training program to try to formalize something like this fellows training program here, precisely because it was so helpful. And I heard the students saying, you know, we don't get the appropriate training here. We don't know, you know, how do we get an article published? How do we do book reviews? Where do we begin looking for jobs? I mean, they were really hungry for that. And I saw that, and you know, I couldn't think of anything but to share with them the syllabus, share with them my experience here at ISSC.
The Institute for the Study of Social Change has its own freestanding space. And I think that that actually is the tangible embodiment of our commitment to intellectual independence.
The Institute has played an invaluable role in helping young scholars, particularly scholars of color, to find their voice and assume their rightful place in the Academy.
The training program that Bob Launer and Troy started produced more faculty of color in the United States in a 20, 30-year period than any other program in the country. That's something to be proud of.
Yeah, and the kind of research orientation that we had, we brought these young kids in here, and we worked with them, and we produced them. And as a consequence, they've gone out. They've been dynamite in the field. I mean, that's what graduate school is all about. I mean, you don't. So you got a famous department, but if you don't produce, you know, some young people to further your ideas, it's not a big deal.
Well, you form a friendship with the students who come by. You can't help it, you know, because you're in contact with them, and then you start doing certain things. You know, you have lunch, or you bring food in the morning, and you know, get together in that manner. But you just form friendships. I mean, you know how natural friendships just kind of, you know, and then you kind of watch them to their career. They go off to, you know, be professors, and they're, you know, it's kind of neat. Yeah.
There are these pockets, these warm pockets that are like substrates for incredible growth of ideas, and I don't think I really got it. I didn't get how privileged I was to have started at the Institute for the Study of Social Change.
One of the ways you do it is you have to have a community, like we had at the Institute. And it was that community which enabled people to do things that they couldn't do by themselves, and to be able to take positions which were unpopular and which were actually detrimental to your own career.
It doesn't seem dated. It doesn't seem anachronistic. It doesn't seem like some odd child of the 70s. it has as much vitality today as it did 30 years ago.
So I met Minkus very early on, David Minkus, and I was wearing some kind of Laura Ashley dress. And I was wearing this, and I remember later Minkus said to me, "You look like Mary Poppins walking in the door." But he was so friendly and so talkative, and I felt like, well, good, I'll have a home here at this place.